Kenneth Moss. Welcome to Apostolic Intelligence.
Hello.
Hello. So, we have some very interesting subject matters to discuss today concerning prophecy in its Old Testament context. But before we get into the heat and the meat of that matter, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I'm Ken Moss. I had a long-standing interest in the Bible, and before that, I was really interested in ancient history and history up to the current day. And I kind of like studying a lot of regions and time periods. Although I kind of like the ancient period, I feel I try to study throughout history. Now, having said that, I don't really have a formal background in history. It's just been a personal interest in reading. It's sort of like my ongoing hobby, almost consuming hobby since I was actually in grade school. Um, my formal background is actually I was a biology major and undergraduate, and then went to medical school, and then did some specialties, and mostly specialized in sleep medicine.
Okay.
Um, my only criteria that would relate to kind of what we're talking about in terms of training, because I'm also into looking at history and the geography of history. I did do a graduate certificate in geographic information systems, which is computerized mapping, and I did that several years ago.
Okay. So we want to talk about Old Testament prophecy in the context of what it would mean in the day that it was spoken and the geographical and geopolitical, I think we could call it, setting
Mhm.
that it was in.
Mhm.
So could you begin talking about what was happening in the ancient world while these prophecies were being given? And give some examples, perhaps?
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the things, if you look at the prophetic books of the Old Testament, say, Isaiah through Malachi, um, I kind of think it's difficult just to take that book and then try to come up with applications for it of the particular prophecies or messages. You really need to first study the historical books, like Genesis through Esther, and really have a good background and grasp of those. And of course, the prophetic books as well. Excuse me, the sometimes called poetic or wisdom books are also important too, like Psalms. Also, there's a lot of history in there, but also a lot of the phraseology and terms and stuff are used in there that the prophets pick up on. So you really need to know all the Bible really good before you start picking out prophecies and trying to come up with different kinds of applications. And I think in terms of ancient history and beyond that is important as well, um, because you might look at a certain um, prophecy and feel that, well, that wasn't fulfilled back then, so therefore it must be a current day or a future. And and that might be very well be true, but I think before you make those conclusions, you really need to know what was going on at the time of the prophecy. And so there's a term called terminus quom. What's the pro quom? What's the earliest time a prophecy could have been written? And then after that is what's the earliest time the prophecy could have been fulfilled or applied.
Okay.
And so, and that's the first thing I look at. What's that earliest time? And then after that, kind of really look at that initial potential application, the world at that time, and then you do that, but then you can move forward through time and see what other applications may have been.
Okay. Well, is it possible to recreate a scenario where you could, like, bring us into a context of a meeting with a great prophet and a king and something that is being spoken that is fulfilled with a certain expectation within a short period of time.
Right. Well, one prophecy I think that fulfills that is actually Isaiah chapter 7. The Bible there in Isaiah and in the historical books like Kings and Chronicles gives a very good background to that. And so you have Ahaz, the ruler of Judah, a very reprobate or wicked ruler of Judah, who and then in that background, and then you have the king of the northern Israel and of Aram Damascus coming down and besieging Jerusalem. So that's a very, and then Ahaz is going out, and Isaiah, they have this kind of encounter near the fuller's field. So we actually know exactly, we kind of know the time it occurred and where this occurred. And Isaiah is asking for kind of confronting Ahaz in a way, because Ahaz is as they say, is a wicked ruler, and and Judah is in really quite a straits. I mean, Jerusalem is besieged and so forth, and it could potentially be conquered, or at least go through a very arduous, siege. It could be a famine and so forth. And so, Isaiah does ask, says, I'll give you a sign that things are going to be all right for Judah. Ahaz says, no, I won't tempt the Lord. We think that, might be a attempt to evade. He's not wanting a sign because he doesn't want to believe, for one thing. So that's one possibility. And Isaiah presents this sign that's going to occur about the a maiden young woman providing having a birth, engendering a child, and calling its name Emmanuel. Now, and this, is going to be that before the child knows, eats curds and honey and knows good and evil, that the siege of Jerusalem will be lifted by those kings, what we call the Syro-Ephraimite coalition, Syria being Aram Damascus, and Ephraim being the main tribe of division of northern Israel, that siege will be lifted, and Jerusalem will be, which is the deliverance of Jerusalem. And this all occurred within, a few years. And this is what happened. The Bible records all of this in like I say, in the Kings and Chronicles narrative. So we have a very definite application of this prophecy, which appeared to occur like almost immediately after it was given.
Is this, would you say, the clearest example of such a case? Because you're able to bring in different books of the Bible to actually demonstrate this?
It's a very clear, it's one of the best ones. I mean, like another one would be, if there's something maybe even more clearer, would be like when David, with the Bathsheba incident, and the child is born, and Nathan, is basically saying the child is going to die. And the child dies, quickly. So that's another example. So there is a precedent for these prophecies being given, and they're having a very soon fulfillment.
Okay.
In that regard.
Okay. So the study that you are involved with then has to do with something called cartographic sequence.
Well, cartography is basically map making, and so one of my projects was to try to get to break the Bible into a series of maps. So that's especially going to be apparent in the historical books. You can do maps of Joshua and Judges and the Kings and so forth. That kind of flows. But I also then, having done that, can you start mapping the prophecies? And that's one of the things I started doing. In fact, I even found, you can do a lot of maps in the Psalms. Even a lot of
Wow.
Psalms are quite relative, or quite conducive to that. But
Huh.
the idea is you break the Bible into maps, little maps, and then from there you can develop larger sequence of maps. So, for example, in Samuel, you might have the Samuel map sequence, the Saul map sequence, the David map. So larger ones that then coalesce into larger. So it's a bit of a hierarchy of sequences. And then when you
Okay.
make a map, you can break the map into further little sections, and those sections would be like arrows or captions on the map. So, when David's fleeing Saul, it'd be, little steps of all the little places he went and so forth.
I see.
And then you would put that together into like a map sequence narrative of the Bible,
Wow.
and it would be visual.
Yes.
And so the idea is you could actually look at the map and get a very quick idea of what's happened, and that would then supplement the reading.
I see. So perhaps you could speak a little bit about the conditions that existed in, say, the time of, for example, in the time of David and Solomon. This is when the kingdom of Israel was at its zenith.
Yes.
All the tribes of Israel were united under one kingdom. There were conquests of neighboring countries. Can you talk a little bit about the conditions that existed in the world at this time,
hmm
which permitted Israel to expand in such a dramatic fashion?
hmm Yes, there's definite conditions that allowed that to occur, and it kind of goes a bit back to the Bronze Age collapse, which is around 1200 BCE or to 1400 BC, depending on your chronology. Now, just prior to that, there were a lot of major empires in the world, like Egypt, which was dominating the Levant, which Israel's in what we call the southern Levant. The Levant being that territory between the Brook of Egypt up to the Euphrates. Um, and so you had like, powerful Mesopotamian empires, whether it be some of the Babylonian, but also Mitannian, the Hittite Empire, and so forth. And those are all dominating the area. With the Bronze Age collapse, which we think is due to the Sea People's migrations that occurred, we have a very chaotic period. All those big empires collapsed. And so now you have where you have a lot of small countries, local regional countries, all have now exist. And so, although Egypt exists, it is somewhat more fragmented. It's what they call the Third Intermediate Period, and it's not really outgoing and able to conquer other things. So within that environment, you now have Israel coming in. And in some ways, I think it's like a probationary period. We're going to take away these big empires, and now you're going to be able to do what you can do here. And what we have is that Israel, at first under the judges and so forth, is keeps as a small country, although surviving. But finally under the great kings of David and Solomon, they actually expand and they go up all the way beyond their traditional borders. But they start either conquering or subduing and at least vassalizing these nations that go from the Brook of Egypt, which is kind of the eastern edge of the Sinai Peninsula. Today it's called the Wadi El Arish, all up to the Levant, and that area is called the Levant. And so during that time, Israel actually becomes a Levantine empire, and there haven't been many of those. One of the problems is
Okay.
they're squashed between Africa and Mesopotamia. It was between Egypt and Assyria. But here they have that time, and they're actually a major power. And so, with that power, they could dominate other countries, and also fend off other nations trying to conquer them. So this is an extremely important time. Now, so this is their probationary period. What are they going to do with it? Now, one of the problems is that they do they do apostate some, and I think that weakens them. And then you have the major problem with the kingdom splitting. So you split the kingdom, you have a weak kingdom, and at times Judah expands and is able to get that southern part of the kingdom back, like under Uzziah and some others. yeah, something we call revanchism, taking back previous territory. In the Northern Kingdom, there's several recrudescences. They come back under Jeroboam II, for example. But overall, they're kind of maintaining as a small kingdom. They've lost that ability to do a Levantine empire again. And they kind of go down further, what we call perfidious. They went into, foreign worship, assimilation, and things like that, pagan worship. And I think that diluted the national resolve, and they declined further. Now, there were opportunities to come back under reformations like Jehoshaphat and
Okay.
Hezekiah and Josiah. They had a potential to rebound back, but unfortunately, their successors went back and they weren't able to expand and get back that Levantine Empire. Then the world, though, while this is going on, the world is changing. The world in the ancient Near East, and you have the Neo-Assyrian Empire comes in. To some degree, Egypt starts rebounding. Eventually, going to have Babylon back, and so this probationary period had great potential for Israel, and they did seize it to some degree. But overall, they squandered that opportunity, and not just them, but the other smaller nations in that area eventually did as well. For example, there is
Okay.
a period, it's not in the Bible, interestingly, but a very important part of King Ahab's reign. It was, of course, Ahab and Jezebel, because they're one of the most wicked kings of the Northern Empire, the Omri
Yes.
dynasty. So you had a time where the Neo-Assyrian Empire was trying to encroach into the Levant, the northern Levant, and a lot of these countries, little countries, have a formulation. They have like about 10 countries get together, some Aramaic, some Phoenician, and northern Israel under Ahab, and they fight the Battle of Karkar, which is up in northern Syria, and they actually repulse. It kind of is a draw, but that's enough to keep the Neo-Assyrian Empire at bay for a while.
Oh.
Now, that's something Ahab did. It's in the records that Ahab did this, and he supplied a lot of the forces for that. It's a very important component of that. That's not actually mentioned in the
Did
Bible.
you say that he fought against the Assyrians?
The
The Neo
Assyrians, a
Assyrians.
coalition. There was a coalition of 10.
Okay.
Now, a lot of in northern Israel, Ahab provided a lot of the forces for that. Even some of the chariots. Countries like Tyre provided, Tyre typical. They provided most of the finances for it, but other
Oh.
countries provide the forces. Now, after that, though, they all collapse. They start fighting among each other. And that's sort of the background between the Battle of Ramoth Gilead, where you have, Ahab trying to
Oh.
get back Ramoth Gilead from
Oh.
Aram Damascus. Well, they had been allies against Assyria, and
Oh.
they
Wow.
had fended off Assyria. Now they're
Okay.
fragmenting again
Ah.
and, fighting among each other. And of course, that's, it's sort of like snatching the old saying of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, this is the best thing that could have happened to Assyria. Is Assyria, they start fragmenting. Assyria is getting stronger, even a bigger empire, consolidating their power more. And so now they'll come in, especially under Tiglath-Pileser III, and end up conquering most of the area.
I see. Okay. That's fascinating. Okay. So how do the prophets enter the scene in all this geopolitics?
And the prophets, even more than foretelling, that's one of the things they do. But even more so, I think they're delivering these messages, a lot of times admonishing messages to admonish the nation that's doing something wrong or they're exhorting the nation to do something right. They're a bit outside the formal political system because you have the rulers, the royal administration, the ministers, the Levitical ministers. The prophets are drawn from several of those, are drawn from that. I mean, some of them do have royal background, and some of them are Levitical ministers, actually.
Oh.
Some, though, come from outside that. But they're basically, in some ways, they're providing a counsel for the nation to get back, to repent, amend their ways, and therefore to strengthen the nation. And I think that's a lot of their messages, because if, the country, if you have a nation and you start worshiping the deities, the gods of other nations, that's sort of weakening your national resolve. You should be trying to build up your own nation, not worshiping the deities of
Oh,
another nation that's not
okay.
just another nation, it's actually an adversary of you. And so, for example, you have Amaziah, one of the Judah kings, who went down and conquered Edom. He then brings back a kind of the despoilment. He brings back some of their gods. His original intention may have been that they were like the trophies of victory. Okay,
Ah,
his victory
okay.
trophies. That might have been
Yeah.
his original intention of why he
Uh-huh.
brought him back. I mean, otherwise he was sort of a righteous king. I mean, he's the one that applied the law of Moses and said, "I'm not going to execute the um, the children of the conspirators that killed my father."
Okay.
Okay. So, he had a lot of good qualities there, but he brought these back, and over time, he started worshiping these gods, these
Huh.
idols.
Yes.
And so that's something you start worshiping the gods of a nation that you defeated.
Yes.
And so a lot of times in ancient history, gods were national gods, and they were the protectors of the nation. And so, if they couldn't protect the nation, then they were in some ways discredited.
Ah,
And so, you're worshiping the gods of a nation that's been defeated, that actually you yourself defeated. You yourself
yes.
discredited these deities, and now you're
Yes.
worshiping them. Um, a lot of times people, when they're defeated by another nation, there's a tendency to take on the gods of those nations. So, for example, not entirely, but I mean, for example, if the Roman Empire conquered you, a lot of times it would make sense that you might still worship your own national deities, but it would make sense to worship the Roman deities because they're pretty strong, right?
I see.
So so the prophets, meanwhile, are trying to bring, I think, Israel and Judah back to the faith, the Mosaic law, which kind of functions as the national constitution of the nation. And by doing that, they're augmenting the nation, augmenting the resolution of the nation, consolidating in some ways, its civic culture. And so we think of all
Huh.
those, things going on in the Jerusalem temple. I don't necessarily think they were just isolated little performative rituals that they did. The fact is, the nation was focused on that, so it becomes your national focus, your national orientation. So your nation becomes focused on that temple, but also means they're focused on that deity. They're focused, which is the Lord, um, and focused on the national constitution that He designated and the rulers that He designated. In this case, the Davidic dynasty. So it's kind of providing that glue for the country to
Okay.
come together, augment, to consolidate. And if they do that, they're going to be strong. And so, for example, some of the aspects of the law, there's a lot in the law about, social justice, taking care of the vulnerable and so forth.
Uh-huh.
And we know even from today, if you have a society where there's a huge, you don't have to have a egalitarian society, but there's going to be variations in a society in terms of rich and poor. But if you have huge levels, we have super rich people, and you have a bunch of people down that's destitute. That's not good for your country. That's an unstable country.
Yes.
Those people at the bottom are eventually they're going to be dissatisfied. And the same thing too, if people aren't able to get like justice in the courts because the rich people can induce with inducements subvert justice to the judges. That's going to make people disenfranchise people, make them upset and feel that they don't
Okay.
have a place in the country. So a lot of these
Okay.
laws in the Constitution and that the prophets are supporting really support the nation, make it stronger.
I see. So what you're saying is that, we both assume that the God of Israel is the one and only God.
Hmm.
And we can see in Israel kind of what it means to serve that one God. Like when
Hmm.
everything is aligned, there's a certain expectation of prosperity and expansion and blessing.
Hmm.
And when those do not align, like when, say, the rulers of the land are not following their calling, then things are going in a direction that is contrary.
Hmm.
And what you're saying is the prophets are coming along alongside the situation at the time. They're giving advice to the rulers and to the people
Hmm.
to turn back and to follow a path
Hmm.
that is correct and appropriate in the eyes of the one God in order to be able to demonstrate what it is to be a kingdom under his rule.
Correct. And I think that's when the nation of Israel would be functioning optimally. Uh, when they're worshiping and serving the Lord exclusively, and they're practicing the law and relating, correctly to their compatriots in the country and those
Yes,
within their
yes,
borders, the stranger and the
yes,
alien as well.
yes.
That's when the country functions optimally. Now, so it's not necessarily when the Bible says, and like in Deuteronomy 28 says, if you do this, you're going to be blessed. If you do this, you're going to be cursed. I don't necessarily see those as just like magical incantations or whatever execrations or something. I think there's actually a bit of a thing that if you practice justice, you're going to help your country, and
I
if
see.
you don't, you're going to eventually hurt your country. Not immediately, but over time, you are.
Hmm.
So having a just country under the law that's also focused on that country and focused on the Lord, that's when the country functions optimally. And that's not to say the country's not going to have problems, but if you think about it, a country that is functioning well, if they do have a disaster, is going to be better prepared and better able to deal with it. I mean, the old saying is the fortune favors the prepared. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, like, even today in our country, we get a
Uh-huh.
bad hurricane. Well, the hurricanes are going to occur whether we're a good country or not, right?
Okay.
But if we are prepared for it, we're going to meet that better. And if afterwards we have a better disaster response and everything.
Yes.
So that's a bit of what you call good governance. And I think
Yes.
that a lot of the Mosaic Law kind of gets down to good governance. You're not going to immunize yourself from problems, but you're going to be prepared for them.
So what the Bible, with Tanakh, seems to be claiming is that the best form of governing is by following the God who created us. In other words,
Hmm.
there's a relationship between God and proper government, or a nation that follows God
Right.
that has a unique quality to it,
Hmm.
which is the best method for success in
Hmm.
human affairs.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I
And
think that's the thing about it. It's some of this. It's not just it is a religious issue, but also if you think about it logically, this makes sense. And I know some people want to, there's sometimes a tendency to try to do one or the other. I'm just going to worship God, and that's going to be it. I'm going to, say my prayers, and which is good,
uh-huh.
but that's it, not doing anything else. And other people say, well, I'm going to practice social justice, and I'm not going to forget about religion and forget about the God of Israel. And I think honestly, to work optimally, you need both together. They support each other.
Yes. Yes, that's a beautiful point. And your study is actually examining this
Hmm.
as a true thing. It's something that has a quality to it that can be tapped into.
Hmm.
Okay, so as you're going through this examination, you're talking about a time of opportunity that was given to the nation
Hmm.
of Israel to kind of make its mark in the world.
Hmm.
And that was during a period where the great powers had collapsed, and there's kind of what do they say, a power vacuum that
Hmm.
exists that
Yes.
Israel is actually able to step into.
Hmm.
So the picture that you create in my mind is that prior to this time of opportunity, the world the then known world was dominated by these huge powers
Hmm.
that had maybe movable borders, but they were still very much in control of the minor people groups
Hmm.
that lived within their vicinity. And you're
Correct.
saying that all these great powers kind of collapsed at a moment, and
Hmm.
it created this environment where small people groups could start exhibiting
Hmm.
their own form of expansion to actually
Hmm.
fill in the power vacuum.
Right. Hmm.
So, so if Israel had this opportunity, and under the reigns of David and Solomon, they actually, like for a while, seized the opportunity and
Hmm.
spread their dominion and their influence to a larger region. What what do you see happening when, say, this opportunity, when they started to withdraw or shrink, and then finally they were taken captive? The northern kingdom goes into Assyria, and
Hmm.
I think they're basically not really heard of after that, right? They just kind of go into diaspora, and they're kind
Hmm.
of assimilated and lost to
Hmm.
history, at least to the best that we can tell. And the kingdom of Judah goes into Babylon. So, so what is the expectation that they will ever attain this kind of scenario that existed in that time of opportunity?
That it could still apply today. I just kind of take the idea that I start from the begin. Any prophecy, I start from its earliest possible thing, and see if it could apply there. And and I find a lot of them I think have been fulfilled, and including even ones that seem to be very obviously messianic. But there could be other applications, and I think that some of what I see is, even if a prophecy seems to have been fully applied or fulfilled, there's still a if you go throughout history, there's still principles that might be existing. So, for example, if we were studying, European history, obviously there's kind of this recurrent theme of Germany and France fighting each other. And so, they had the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, and somebody there might say it might make statements about that war, which people did, and but also knowing that may be the end. There's a World War I and II that's going to come. We still have a lot of history to work through. So I think that sometimes prophecies, even if they are kind of fulfilled, they still might seem to be fulfilled. That there's still some wisdom there. There's just some geopolitical principles there that are still going to work their way throughout history. And so, and I think that some of the prophecies are looking at the situation and making, uh, you know, prophecies, making these predictions, and some of them make good sense. I mean, in 1978, I predicted that the Soviet Union was going to fall. And so, it was just based on some things I felt about the Soviet Union and the international relations and the inertia of the Soviet Union. It doesn't really make me a prophet. Uh, and in
Okay.
1994, this is a current thing, 1994, when countries, UK, the US, signed the Budapest Memorandum, which had Ukraine give the nuclear weapons back to the Russian Federation. I predicted that within 20 to 30 years, Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Um, that doesn't really. I'm not a prophet,
Okay.
and so I'm picking out ones I was right about. I've also made wrong predictions. Okay, so
Okay. Okay.
but I mean that's some of what we're talking about. So if you make a prediction about Babylon rising again, um, or Iran, then those things might recur throughout history. Just that principle is there. Now, in terms of Israel coming back, I think, I do think, although a lot of the prophecies have been fulfilled, I think Israel still has a significant, the Jewish people in Israel do have still significance, and therefore I think that it's possible of an Israelite nation in the future. obtaining like a Levantine Empire status.
Okay. So when the prophecy is fulfilled once, in a way, if this word came from God, we can say God is cleared. He doesn't really have to do anything more.
Mm-hmm.
This has already been accomplished, and it needs to be looked at as simply, okay, the word was spoken, it was fulfilled. No one can blame God for this.
Uh-huh.
However, if this has an application for the future, then it is by God's allowance or permission, or
Mm-hmm.
you might call it, you might call it grace or some other term, but it's something that, in a sense, God is not obligated to do, but something that we actually watch. When we watch it unfold, we can attribute it to God.
Mm-hmm.
Is that safe to say?
Right. Because a lot of times, even like, yeah, I think like even if prophecy has been fulfilled, it doesn't mean it's not relevant anymore. And I think you could still, in terms of Israel and the Jewish people, you can still go back to the Abrahamic covenant, which still seems to imply that they're going to have a Levantine empire in those Abrahamic covenants, maybe. Um, I just see, because in some ways, I know that some people listen to me and think I'm a preterist, where I think everything's been fulfilled. I mean, that's usually what people think of me. But is actually, I think it's a bit more, it could be a bit more historical, continuous historical, where these things kind of reverberate through history. And they still might have applications. Now, to me, I think that's somewhat different than saying it has someone, because they always get back to, well, there's a dual application, there's a partial fulfillment, and things like that. I'm not really kind of saying that necessarily. I think it's more just the principles have been established and it might recur, and because of that principle that's been established, it might, and on the basis of recurrent themes, it might recur. It might occur in something similar might recur in the future.
I
That's a
see.
bit more contingent than I think a lot of people might be comfortable with. But
Sure.
the other thing too, I think that some of our ideas that of what we think of, like the so-called kingdom age and so forth. I mean, you kind of see it to me. A lot of times, like in the reigns of David and Solomon, and then, Hezekiah and Josiah. And I think you might see it even in the remigration Judah, like Zerubbabel, who was the ethnarch of the remigration. I mean, you look back at some of the things they say about Zerubbabel, like in Haggai calls him the signet ring of the Lord, and then you look at like Zechariah 7, where Zerubbabel, I mean, he's basically the anointed, the Messiah.
Yeah.
So sometimes I see the kingdom age as being as an ideal that could occur in history. Um, I have one term I've kind of made it up. It's called Satirocracy. So if you take Satirocracy, you have different kind of, like, oligarchy is ruled by the few. Satirocracy would be kind of ruled by the saved, ruled by the righteous. And so if you have that idea of a good governance coming in, that sort of fulfills the basic ideas. I mean, you look at Nehemiah after he instituted his reforms, the mortgage reform and different things like that. You have kind of like he's describing a kind of a great system where things are just and everything, and that I think is part of this recurrent theme that can happen of the
Okay.
goal to go for.
So would you say then a theme of all of this Tanakh historical, prophetical word that is given is the idea, like posing what the ideal type kingdom under God's auspices would be? Like there's something that is being strived for, an order in humanity where God's will can be demonstrable in society within borders. It's moving towards that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think it's one of the other things, another term I have kind of come up with is salvation history. And so you take the historical process and, it kind of starts in Genesis and
Uh-huh.
Abraham, very important there. And you have the
Yes.
Sinai revelation and so forth. And it's sort of like all that history would culminate in kind of a righteous governance, what I call
Okay.
Satirocracy.
So there's an end goal in mind. We can say that God
Right.
has an end goal in mind,
hmm
but
Correct.
is it
And it's
uh
saying it's gonna, if you just apply it, honestly, a lot of the stuff, if you just apply, if any country did it, they applied it, they would be a better country. But I think there is something special about Israel that's going to be, um, could be world changing, and that's sort of the idea of you have Isaiah 2:1-4 about the world, the law going from Zion,
yes.
and so like in some ways, what I envision that being, how does the law go from Zion to help the rest of the world? And I think you see some of that, something I call the Zion Academy. And so you go back to some of those chapters in first, uh, for First Kings and Second Chronicles, where you have Solomon there, and people from all over the world, scholars are coming to Zion to be taught by Solomon. And he's teaching them all sorts of things, about including science and biology and different things.
Yes. Yes.
And they then go back to their other countries and probably are teaching what they learned. They actually, and one of the ones, they're actually paying tuition for this as well. So it's like an academy. And I know nowadays you kind of think of now the Plato Academy in Athens and so forth.
Yeah.
But this was actually a Zion Academy
Uh,
with Solomon teaching.
okay.
And I think he's teaching them kind of instead of teaching them Plato's Republic, I think he's teaching them more of the law. And this is going to go back and help the rest of the world. And if you take that on a larger scale, I think that's a lot of what I think the kingdom would be. Now that it's predominantly educational. It's in Zion. They
Yes.
might have that Levantine
Yes.
Empire, but they're educating the rest of the world. Um,
Ah.
and I think that can happen. And various times in history, we've seen some of that happen.
Okay. So we can say then that if God prospers a nation, or particularly his nation, to have a dominion that is significant enough to be seen as a world power, that it's for the purpose of spreading the knowledge of God throughout the world.
Correct. Especially Israel. But I think that occurs, you see that in other nations if they're providing positive benefit for other
Sure,
countries.
sure, sure.
Right.
So we should look at these historical happenings of significance, like the creation of the state of Israel, the recreation of the state of Israel,
hmm
as opportunities to demonstrate some greater purpose than just the forming of a nation.
Correct.
Okay.
I think that's, I mean, to look at the Zionist movement, I think some of the Zionists just wanted Israel to be just another nation. I mean, you have kind of the League of Nations or the United Nations and Israel, just another flag there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Israel ultimately has a larger mission than that to benefit the world. Now, I know, today in August 31st, 2025, people would say that's furthest thing from happening. Israel's the most controversial nation in the world, kind of pariah status. But I think, if we work through that, Israel's the nation, the world, I think ultimately needs Israel.
Well, yes, I
And I
agree.
know that too, that, you take the current state of Israel, but I think as you go through things that the current state of Israel is in need of a reformation.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and I'm not necessarily saying, the current
No,
political
because
structure,
they're not the
but I do,
ideal. They're not the ideal state
right, right.
underneath the rule of God at this
Yeah,
point.
not, Not, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's a lot of
Yes.
positive there, but they still have
Sure.
room for improvement.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. 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 Wow. So
In
so
other words,
this.
that could be in some ways another application of Elijah in Malachi. I mean, Israel kind of needs a kind of an Elijah reformation to bring them back to Torah, back to their national constitution.
Okay. So the question that it becomes obvious here. So we are both Christians.
Mm-hmm.
We both believe that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
The nation of Israel does not recognize Jesus as the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of Christianity, as you're well aware of, sees the nation of Israel as something separate from the church, so-called church.
Mm-hmm.
So the obvious question here is, what is the if you can imagine that Christianity somehow is united or has some kind of unified message, which obviously is not the case, but
Mm-hmm.
just in theory, in concept, if you have Christianity and Judaism and now a Jewish state, what is the ideal role of Christianity to help the Jewish people come to a greater knowledge of their own calling and the truth that exists in God's eyes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, ultimately the Christians can be supportive of Israel, can also help in the reformations and things like that. In the current day, I think it's difficult because most of the Christianity has a lot of teachings that are and practices that are antithetical to Judaism, and for good
Yes.
reason. I mean, and the Jews would be repulsed by that, and the Jews would be repulsed for good reason. And for example, the Trinity, things like substitutionary atonement with human sacrifice and so forth. Those are things, and so when you talk about Messianic Judaism today, I mean, those are all very prominent. They have those, and so I think Christianity today has a lot of problems. I think almost Christianity today itself needs a reformation
Yes.
before we can really talk about how we're going to support and help the Jews in their reformation. Because, I mean, you take today the World Council of Churches is very anti-Israel. And again, there's reasons to criticize Israel, but a lot of times any Semites aren't really criticizing, they're just criticizing Israel, and then if Israel gives them an excuse to do it, that they exploit it. But in a basic sense, they're anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. So it's a very difficult situation. I think that in some ways we need to somehow reform Christianity, because I think if I was Jewish and I looked at the Christian church today, including Messianic Judaism, I would be repulsed and say,
Yes. Sure.
no.
Yeah. It's a good thing they are repulsed
Right.
at some of
That's
these
right.
teachings. That's
Yeah,
right.
and historically in Christianity there was a replacement theology where the Jews and it was permanently replaced by the church, and so that's a problem there. But there's other problems as well. I mean, I know recently a lot of evangelical Christians have kind of switched to kind of a pro-Israel, more pro-Jewish position. But historically, I mean, they believed that their Antichrist, was going to be a Jewish person, almost like the Messiah, who was going to rebuild the temple.
Right. Which is
And
so strange.
so
That's a
they
strange thought.
were that there's a lot, and I think honestly that's still below the surface. But I mean, there was always a scenario if the Jewish Messiah is revealed and starts rebuilding, doing all these reforms and rebuilding the temple, the Christians would think he was the Antichrist.
Yes. Yes.
So Yeah, and that's not. I mean, that's not too recent. That the majority of them believe that.
Yes. So if Jesus is truly the Jewish Messiah,
Hmm.
then how do you see his role in Israel's future? Like, what would be the ideal and proper acknowledgement of Jesus by the Jewish nation in order that God's will would be fulfilled and this idealized environment where the word of God, where the knowledge of God, where God's goodness is broadcast to the nations, how would this fit the kind of ideals that the prophets were speaking to?
Yeah, I think you'd have to have sort of some preparation. Yeah, I think among Reformation, among the Christians, and among the Jews, to bring them all of us to more of a biblical basis.
Okay.
That's one thing. I think you would have to have Jesus doing things that are in some ways going to help the Jewish people, whether it be through admonition and exhortation, and that would allow and to be able to get over the various impediments they've had for 2,000 years. I mean, you need to have that clear teaching, and whether that's like an Elijah Reformation back to the law of Moses, or those are some components of it. I think I have to admit, at the moment, it's a very difficult thing to conceive of. I mean, there's so much
Okay, so but what
antipathy there, and for good reason.
so I think what you're trying to address, if I understand your work correctly, you're trying to address what is, according to the prophets, what is the idealized will of God
Hmm.
for mankind as it's demonstrated in society, within borders, within, say, national government. So this is a very
Hmm.
physical thing.
Hmm.
And what what this what this does by setting forth this idealized God-centric environment, what it does is it challenges both Christians and Jews to come into a compatible state of mind in order for the fulfillment of this to occur.
Hmm.
So, in this condition, we as Christians can't point to the Jews and say, look, you're entirely wrong.
Hmm.
We have it right. You've got to follow our program in order to attain this. And the Jews
Hmm.
can't point to us and say, we've got it entirely wrong.
Hmm.
But there are components of both Judaism and Christianity that are according to God's will that need to be highlighted, and the things that are contrary need to be set aside, removed, repented from, reformed, and so
Hmm.
forth, in order to come into a state of being where God's will can actually be fulfilled, where it can come to fruition.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's sort of like what you described. It's like a dialogue between the two, and that we come to a better understanding. I mean, I don't know exactly what that is at the moment. That's part of the dialogue.
Yes.
You need to have
Right, right, right.
the process to see what you come up with, as opposed to thinking you got it figured out at the beginning. But I think we need to get that dialogue started, and part of that is removing different impediments to it. That's one step. Um, I do think, one of the things I do think, humans are what we call an embodied creature. I mean, we are a biological creature. We exist in the world, and we view the resurrection as being physical, primarily physical. So that's why I still go back to the idea of we're existing in a geographic sphere of the Earth and so forth,
Yes.
and maybe, I don't know, in the Kingdom Age we might go into space travel and go into other planets, but still the home base was Earth. Okay.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
and
yes.
so we're still Earthlings, so to speak. And so that's our where we are and where we started. And And I kind of do view Israel and Jerusalem as being the center of the earth, the political earth, eventually.
Yes. So I think what you're speaking here is very important when you talk about the the believers in the God of Israel understand that there will be a physical resurrection.
Correct.
This actually is a very important thing to highlight as
Mm-hmm.
an important first century doctrine,
Uh-huh.
which has been corrupted, and I don't know what the right word is. It's been that the focus of the resurrection of humanity, God's will to resurrect us and to bring us into a kingdom age where we're actually taking on the responsibility that was given to man in the beginning. This is something that God is focused on. And without that knowledge, everything else that you're saying doesn't really make sense, does it?
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
have you have no reason to focus on prophecies that were just fulfilled or the possibility of them, reoccurring without
Right.
the firm belief that there will be a resurrection and a perfected rule of God in which
Mm-hmm.
human beings are taking on the responsibility to image God in this world.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no reason to conduct the study that you're doing. Is that
Yeah, I mean
correct?
that sort of makes it come together and makes it
Yes.
intention, purpose to it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
It's when it all comes together.
this theme of resurrection would be the center point under which Jews and Christians can start the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way
Yeah, that would be a
that's
good
the way
point.
I'm understanding
Yes. Uh-huh.
what
Yes.
you're doing here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this has been such an interesting conversation. I think perhaps you could speak to the importance of the resurrection of Jesus. We believe that Jesus was raised by God's power to immortal life. So how significant is this with respect to the focus of your study and your hope for the future? Why is this important?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is like the resurrection is sort of, I think, is the culmination of the Gospels, for example. Um, and and afterward, that's what changed the disciples and so forth was the resurrection. Um, and so I do kind of view it as the central viewpoint, and also kind of a you say foreshadowing or whatever of a future resurrection for us. And that's one of the things that Jesus fulfilled, and why he's can be the Messiah of the future. And I think that I think that goes throughout most of the New Testament. It talks quite a bit about that.
Mm-hmm. So Jesus is the reason why you have an interest in this study.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground. I know we had wanted to talk about some specific prophecies
Mm-hmm.
and how they were given in the Old Testament and how their application is used
Mm-hmm.
in the New Testament.
Okay.
So I think that might be something for the future.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there is something within the scope of what we talked about now that we have not covered that you want to address before we close this session out.
Well, I think one of my things is that we kind of get to get things in a historical process, context rather, of where we are and where we're going, and I think we look at the Bible as where we came from, and ultimately where we're going. And so our current day is what we call interpolation. Means you have 2 points and you're trying to say where are we between those 2 points, You may not always be right, but you kind of at least have 2 points to work with, okay?
Okay.
Um, we're not just our current life and our current era is not just randomly thrown on a dartboard. We're between 2 points, a beginning and an end point that's been
Okay.
defined by the Bible, the Tanakh, and the Tanakh, the Bible. And so that's where we are. And we need to, I think one of our things I try to say is like, where do we make our life applicable to that? Do we put ourselves in context? And so, a lot of times people read the Bible and they go, oh, life application. How do I apply the Bible to myself? And that's an important, but I think it's only one aspect. The other aspect is we know the Bible, we know where we are and where we're going. Even more important is how do we apply ourselves to the Bible, to
Huh.
that teaching. And so we need to get orientated to that. It's not just, picking and choosing and having, me become a better in my career or something like that. We need to kind of, which is all right. I'm not saying not to do that, but it's all right. But is the even more important is to apply ourselves to the Bible,
Ah.
to the teaching, the prophets, and Jesus, for example, the example of Jesus, things like that, and applying ourselves to that, and that be our focus.
So what you're suggesting then is that even as in ancient Israel, God gave opportunity for them to demonstrate what it looks like for a nation to
Yeah,
serve the one true God.
that's
That
right.
we have a similar calling, a similar responsibility, and also an active role in helping to fulfill what God intends to do.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and like all that's the thing. Even though we talk a lot about ancient history, we talk about the future. We're living kind of an time of opportunity now, and are we letting those opportunities go? I mean, like in Nahum 1:15 or so, it talks about the glad tidings that are coming to Israel, and those glad tidings in the context of Isaiah, the context of Nahum. And Israel at the time was the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the fall of Nineveh of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And that
Ah,
actually provided opportunity for Israel. They didn't really seize it though, but that was their opportunity.
huh.
Josiah was killed. The Josiah's reformation um, wasn't continued, and they kind of missed that great opportunity that they could have had. And even if you look today, it's like you look at the news and it's just like what's going on. I mean, it just seems all bad, right? And so you need to look at your previous things that gone on in current events in your own life, and you realize now I'm thinking back 20, 30 years ago, that was actually a time of opportunity. I could have done so many things and I didn't really seize the opportunity. And now that I'm retired, I can think I'm kind of old and beyond opportunity, but now I have great opportunity to do things. So that's the thing. We always need to look at and then to put your life in that context, historical context, in historical in the sense through the lens of the Bible. And then you realize the opportunity that can occur. And it may be things that aren't obvious to you. Sometimes you have to begin the process. So, for example, like we were talking about earlier about, I don't know exactly how to resolve the Christian and Jew problem, but we need to start with dialogue,
Yes.
and move from that. And that's a area of opportunity.
Yes. 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 Well, very good. I so much appreciate this. This is really a
Thank you.
mind-opening conversation. I know that we could talk for a lot longer and go into more detail. And God willing, we will again
Okay.
sometime in the future with
Well,
your
thank you. I enjoyed it. And thank
gracious,
you for inviting me.
gracious permission and availability. Um, so yes, Brother Kenneth Moss, I'd like to thank the Lord and you for taking this time out. And any closing thoughts?
Uh, no, I enjoyed today. There's a lot of things we can still talk about. And like I say, maybe in the future, if you have me back, we can talk more about maybe a specific prophecy. Today I talked about a lot of generalities and
Yes.
maybe, getting into a specific thing with maybe some visual things like maps and stuff and timelines might be able to be more fruitful.
Okay, good, good,
Yep.
good. Yeah, this is a good introduction.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, farewell And
Okay,
God
thank you.
bless you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay.